Hi, hello, how are you? That's right, ladies and gentlemen. That Rockwell timepiece says it's time. So come on in, stay a while. It's time to get coached up with another edition of the Coach Scott Field Show. That's right, Rockwell is continued to be a proud sponsor of our show, and I'm a brand ambassador for them. Go to rockwelltime.com and use the code COACH20 for 20% off of any order there at that website. Like and follow the Coach Scott Field Show here on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, my man John and I say turn that knob up. We're about to put that flavor in your ear and talk a lot of basketball and a lot of writing here in this one. So watch us on DBTV Monday through Friday, where we could be seen in as many as 300 million households. And thank you to our 300,000 loyal followers there. Also watch us on CSTV on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. and the Rewind Sports 60. I appreciate your continued support and these platforms. Without further ado, thrilled to welcome this gentleman in as a guest of our show tonight. John Willkom, he has two books, and thank you so much for sending both those in. This one here is his first book, which is an Amazon bestseller, The Walk-On Warrior. And this one here has just recently been put out, No Fear in the Arena. John, great work, my friend, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott. No, I really appreciate you having me. And also, congratulations to you. Indiana Sports Hall of Fame, Basketball Hall of Fame. Just reading about your career and the amount of places you coached, the number of levels you've coached at, just incredible success. So congratulations on the accolades, certainly well deserved.
I appreciate you saying that. When I got the phone call, I was like, man, they must have really lowered their standards to let this skinny bald guy with a limp come in there. But I'm thrilled. But thank you for your kind words. You and I have not met, but I feel like through these books, I've gotten to know you. And not only have I gotten to know you, I've become a fan. So tell our viewers of our show tonight and those listening in podcast form, tell us a little bit about your background and how it came to fruition and how it came to be the Walk-On Warrior.
Absolutely. So I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, town called Marshfield. It's most famous for the world's largest round barn, which sounds like something you'd see in Wisconsin or Indiana or somewhere in the
That's
Midwest.
right. Midwest, baby.
Exactly. But I've always just had a deep love for basketball. And even when I was a small kid, my dad coached basketball recreationally, youth teams, even teams where he didn't have a kid involved, just because he loved the game. And so I remember, 3, 4 years old, my dad just coaching random, seventh, eighth grade teams because he loved to do it. And so being around the gym, it's one of those things as a kid where you play lots of sports, but eventually you kind of just say, man, like baseball is fun, but I want to play basketball. I want to play it all the time. And so, I had a really good high school career. I was a 3-time all conference player. And I actually went to play at a Division II school in Minnesota, in Crookston, Minnesota, in the Northern Sun Conference. And I was 9 hours from home. We, from a win-loss perspective, had a terrible season my freshman year. We won 4 games. I think we were 4-21. And at that point, I kind of said, I did get to play quite a bit as a freshman. And so it wasn't one of those situations where, I'm riding the pine and not playing. But I was just kind of doubting and questioning, how do I ultimately want to spend my time? You're in college. There's a lot of change, as you know, any freshman can attest to. And so at that point, I wanted to transfer to a bigger school. And I was going to go to Wisconsin or Marquette just because those were teams that I was a fan of. One of the ironies and one thing that people will maybe appreciate reading both these books is my dad was a student at Marquette in the 70s. He was there when they won a national title in 1977. So I heard stories about McGuire and Rick Majerus and There was the rare school nights where Marquette would be on, it's past your bedtime, and it's like you can stay up for that, but pretty much nothing else. And so there was just this kind of admiration for Marquette as a school. And long story short, I decided to go to Marquette. I thought at that point my basketball career was probably over. And I actually reached out to Tom Crean and just said, I would love to help out in any way possible. And he said, come be around our summer camps, participate, be around the program, and we'll see if we have a spot for you. And helping at camps turned into scrimmaging in the evenings. And after like 3 months of just being kind of encompassed in Marquette basketball, one of the assistant coaches came up to me and just said, we want to have you actually be on the team. And and again, I wasn't a bad player, but I wasn't a Division I caliber player by any means. And so that's what kind of led to, a couple months of just brutal conditioning, and you kind of get your mind and your body into that mindset to contribute and be a part of something like that. And that's how I ended up at Marquette. So um it's maybe not as crazy as a story as some other walk-ons, but I think too at that time, now you see a lot of walk-ons and they're waving towels at the end of the bench and it's kind of a sideshow. And it was just very different for me because I was treated as a part of the team, and I was coached hard. I was pushed hard in the weight room. A lot was expected of me academically. And so I really felt like I was one of, the 14 people that we had on the roster.
Yeah, see, I'm going to correct you because you're being very humble. I was around the college game as a coach for 14 years, and to be a walk-on at that level, let's give you your flowers because the amount of discipline that takes, the amount of hard work that takes, the amount of sacrifice that takes, there's a driven purpose there, and it's a special individual who can endure, day in and day out. Of course, we've seen movies of Rudy and things like that, but you lived that life and you made the sacrifices to be a part of that team and to be around a successful coach with a great tradition who was going to rebuild that program. And you got to be blessed and be around some great players yourself there at Marquette. Talk about some of those teammates that kind of helped you as you were around them and watch them, and what Tom Crean's relationship with you, how that helped you.
Yeah, so one of the first things that happened to me is I sat down in Tom Crean's office and just coached a player, and we went through expectations, and again, it wasn't like I'm going to treat you differently than anybody else. It was like, this is how we do things here. This is what I expect of you. And one of the key messages in that meeting was, we had a senior point guard. His name was Travis Diener, and Travis was a great player. He had a great statistical year as a junior. I think he was one of two guys to average like 18 and 8 assists in the country. But he said, "Hey, listen, you're here to push Travis, and I want you to hound him on every possession, every drill, every weight room challenge, make him better." Now, of course, it's like, yeah, I'm thrilled to do that. And one of the beauties about being around greatness and great players, though, is that he would do things that I've never seen anybody do. And I don't mean necessarily athletically, because he wasn't maybe the most gifted athlete, but he would hit shots that were undefendable. He would just lean in slightly in the post and shoot step back shots over both shoulders and hit tough bank shots. And he was just such a great decision maker off the pick and roll. And so it's one of those things where, to me, that's the evolution of a great point guard, of a great basketball player, of even the step up from high school maybe to Division II to Division I. It's just, you see the little things that it's like, man, this guy is so good at some of this stuff. He's in the trap, but he never turns it over. Like, why is that? And it comes down to practice, comes down to experience. It comes down to seeing these things multiple times, both in person and on film. And so, I mean, I absolutely love that part of it just because I felt like number one, I'm here to push him, but I'm learning so much. I'm getting better. I'm getting challenged. The things I did to stop him yesterday aren't working today. And ultimately, that's what proves to me, what a great player is all about as well, is we've been around each other for a year now. And he still tricks me with stuff. Um, and that's awesome, and then to see a guy like that, he got drafted in the second round by the Orlando Magic, and to be a part of all of the stuff that people don't see, and then to see him recognized, as one of the 450 best players in the world, was just really incredible for me.
I love hearing you share those stories and kind of get into the details because we as professional coaches, we always talk about having a go-to move or an asset that you bring to the team, but then to have that counter move. And I hear you describing those counter moves that he was showing you by, bumping, creating a little space, step back, and then, soft touch off the glass. Takes hours of repetition, takes hours of muscle memory, and to have the discipline to be able to do that. But yet you're the gentleman there who's challenging him every day, and you too are growing and evolving because of the level of competition going on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And I played with another guy, his name's Steve Novak, who played for
Ah,
the Knicks, had an amazing 11-year career. And we used to do a shooting drill where we'd shoot as many threes as we could make in 5 minutes. And I'll never forget this because, Steve and I would partner more just because I would hustle to get the rebounds, and he could get up more shots. But, I essentially just stood under the hoop. And, I'll never forget the day when he hit 73 out of 75 threes in
wow,
5 minutes. And you're like, you know, there's not many people in the world that can do that, much less at 6'10".
that's
And
right.
so, again, being around stuff like that, if you're in a, 3-point drill, all of a sudden it's like, me hitting 7 out of 10 isn't good enough anymore. It just raises the level of play for everybody. And that's an amazing thing when you have guys like that with maybe a specialized skill set, um, and also guys that are older that have kind of been through the rigor of, you know, don't let that stuff bother you. Just move on to the next drill. Take one thing at a time. There was a lot of wisdom that was kind of passed down of just, how do you get through a college basketball season? You can't overthink. You can't put too much pressure on yourself. You gotta take it one step at a time, and that's kind of that's what you learn to do, and that's what the best players, teach the younger guys in, I'm sure, more programs than just at Marquette.
That's right. I mean, it's on to the next one. But when I hear, that many threes being made, the amount of physical conditioning that goes along with that as well, because with the mechanics, your footwork, your legs, I mean, there's a lot of things involved. And, for him to be at 6'10", I mean, he's a great shooter with a great touch that had a phenomenal career.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think all those guys, it's so important because Steve was a freshman in 2003 when Marquette went to the Final Four. And people remember Dwayne Wade and
That's right.
and obviously, them beating Kentucky, who was the number one overall seed that year. And just what a special run that was for that team. But you also see these guys that maybe played 3 to 6 minutes, in any of those NCAA games, and how they were able to build on that the next year and the next year. And all of a sudden, like when I get there, Steve's a junior, and he's much more vocal. He's a much better rebounder. He's much more intense defensively. And as a coach, again, coaches see that. But a lot of average fans are like, well, he averaged 9 a game last year. Now he's only averaging 10 this year. And it's like, but look at how much more complete he is. And look at how much better our team is because he's in a leadership role. And so I think there's so many things like that. And I think it's a responsibility often, if you're mentored well by older guys, you really kind of owe that then once you get into that position. And man, I mean, let's face it, there's so many days when you don't want to talk and you're just exhausted. maybe you had a tough time on a test and you just came from the weight room. I mean, there's 100 reasons why you could just not want to do that. But the fact that those guys do, I mean, again, I think that's what ultimately leads to good programs, sustainable programs, good teams year after year.
Yeah, it's so true because there truly is a culture, and culture's thrown around so much like a cliche or coach speak, but there truly is, and that's done with daily habits, daily routines, and taking care of the specific details, competing at a high level. And and you can speak on this because not only have you been in the basketball world but also in the sales world, and you've had success in both, so I'm sure that culture and those parallels from the work habits that you learned and life lessons that you learned on the court carried over into everyday life for you. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that regardless of whether you become a professional athlete, I mean, most people that play high level college athletics, there's a mental toughness to you. There's a competitiveness that is really like a muscle. I mean, you become more competitive. One of the things that we used to do is we used to play full court one-on-one up to 7 by 1s. And I'll never forget this because this was so much of just a mental grind. When let's say you're down 5-2, and if you lose, you have a sprint that you have to finish in under a minute. And if you haven't even been running, finishing that sprint in under a minute is going to be challenging to begin with. But much less, when you're exhausted at the end of this. But you would literally observe guys and you would kind of see how they would start to quit because they knew they had to run and they just wanted to like wave the flag. I'm going to do my sprint, move on to the next thing. And as you get older and you're around the program a little longer, all of a sudden you see people that it's like, he's still going like 110% and he's losing. And all of a sudden it's 5-3, it's 5-4. And they don't even think about the sprint. They don't think about it. They're just like, I'm going to win the next possession. And that was one of the things that, when I wrote the recent book about Travis, he just had a different competitive mindset than really anybody I've ever met that way, where regardless of the circumstances, he just always seemed to be so locked in to what was going on. And I mean, I'll admit I was probably 50-50 on that bar. Sometimes it's like, all right, I'm focused, but man, it's easy to let that just creep in and say, I'm gonna take my loss and move on to the next thing.
Wow, great stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching the Coach Scott Fields Show here, and we've got award-winning author John Willkom here sharing stories and insights and experiences for you, for tools for your toolbox, and I love that. Want to talk a little bit first about your Amazon bestseller, um, Walk On Warrior. You share some great insights in this book that will provide a blueprint for the readers. And you mentioned your mom and your dad, and thanking them for always pushing and supporting you. How much did they have a role in kind of helping mold you to become who are today?
I had a huge role. I mean, I think I grew up in a family with 4 kids, and we were all close in age. And being in a family like that, you're naturally kind of competitive. But having kids myself now, man, there's nothing better than being able to, mentor your kids, push them in the right direction, just kind of set a tone and example for how things should be done. Um, I think the best thing my parents probably ever did for me is they didn't bail me out from stuff. They would just say, if you're going to go and play in that game or run in that track meet, get yourself prepared and go and do your best. And one thing that I talked about in that book is when I was really little, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I wanted to run on the local track team. Parents are like, fine, no problem. So I'm running on this track team, and there's a lot of older boys, probably 4 or 5 years older than me. And again, I'm in a town of 19,000 people. Um, Little did I know that, the guy on my right was going to be an NFL football player. The kid on my left actually won a gold medal in the Athens Olympics in track and field. And then the other guy was like a heptathlete at the University of South Carolina. So like it was just this, I don't know what was in the water in those years, but we had some tremendous athletes at a young age. And there's things like that where you kind of look back and you circle something and you're saying, what maybe steered me in one direction versus the other. And those are the types of experiences where my parents definitely, I always appreciate that they gave me the opportunity, but it was like I was getting my butt kicked from these three guys. And similar to the Marquette thing, it's like, well, you better get better quickly. Otherwise, this isn't going to be any fun. And so you get faster and you learn how to do all this stuff. And all of a sudden, then, when you go run against other 8-year-olds, you're smoking them. Um, but that was really good for me because it wasn't like those guys were saying anything to me other than like, step up your game if you want to like run with the big dogs.
Yeah, and see, and there's something to be, learn from those life lessons where I feel like in today's AAU culture, there's so many coaches that don't allow the life lessons to come to fruition or allow them to manifest themselves because they're too busy trying to, go to a court where they can dominate and they can be successful. But there's a lot of quality lessons to be learned through those trials, tribulations, and challenges on a daily basis, and you're speaking firsthand to that. And I love several of the stories, that you share in the book. Talking about being the 400-meter runner, and then you're on an AAU team that had a gentleman that ends up playing, there at I believe Wisconsin, and
Yep.
just great stories that I feel that myself and that any reader who picks that up for their library, they're going to connect with it, they're going to understand it, they're going to feel it, and they'll receive the message. And I thought you did a great job of sharing those specific details. Share a few more of those stories, from the Walk On Warrior that were poignant to you and were meaningful to you that you learned a lot from.
Yeah. I mean, I think just one of the themes of this book, and I mean, maybe I kind of did it intentionally, but sometimes it just kind of seeps through, which is, I read a lot of sports books and a lot of them are, they're kind of sugar coated. And there's always that fine line of, you want to respect people, you want to respect the locker room and the people and the coaches and the players that you've, been close to. But at the same time, you also want to tell something with some authenticity that, to your point, brings people there. It's like, don't just tell me what happened, like, bring me there, tell me what it was like. And so, when I was freshman, sophomore in high school, I kind of would sit here and I would think, I would have loved to have read a book like this of just kind of what it takes. What does it take to go and play at Marquette? What are those strength and conditioning sessions like? How hard are they? And so it's a little bit of a taste of reality that way. Um, and on the flip side, there's a lot of stuff in there too about just the tremendous opportunities you get when you're around something like that. And, Rick Majerus and, the fact that I was interning for a sports agent and Rick's like, I need an assistant. And he's like, well, John's available. And he's like, I want a female. And, but Rick and I eventually, we worked together for an entire summer and I did odd jobs for him. And I think, one of the funny stories is we used to talk a lot about, he's like, I'm getting in shape, and he was doing a lot of swimming at the hotel. And he would even have me make him, he's like, what do you consider a healthy lunch? So I'd make random stuff. But then one day, I get a text from him asking if I can pick up 89 pounds of bratwurst at a local, meat company. Swore that it was for an event. And I'm like, I've got your calendar in front of me. There's no events on here. Um, and so we had a great time, but I think that there's so many things like that where, he mentored me in a different way. I eventually end up getting a job out of college in Utah, of all places. Um, and I think that, one of the consistent things in my life and career is just you be open to opportunities. Action leads to action. You be good to people. You work really hard. Um, and good things will happen to you. And it's not maybe always on your time, but eventually, the cream kind of rises to the top.
See, I love that because it's so well stated and it's so factual because I can always remember people saying, oh, good things happen to good people, and stay connected to the game, which you also use the same term. And if you can surround yourself with great people who uplift others, and and mentor, lead, guide, and direct, I mean, only positive things can happen. So yeah, I'm in Salt Lake City myself right now because of those same choices and decisions that have led me this way. And the fact that here you were, not even 15 miles from me, didn't even know it, but you're helping at East High School, working with young kids, and you ended up doing the same things that your father did, coaching, younger kids and working with kids and teaching them skills and life lessons. And I love that about the stories.
I think it's kind of in your soul a little bit. And someone asked me, did you ever think you'd be an author? And the answer is absolutely not. I started writing almost notes to myself. You could call it even a diary of some sort. Um, and over a 13-year period, that's what turned into Walk On Warrior. And to be honest, I never thought about making it into a real book. I thought, hey, I've got some cool stories. If anything, it'll jog my memory, tell it to my kids someday. It just helps me remember. But again, my wife and I, we moved to Portland, Oregon for a medical residency. And anyone that's been through that, it's absolutely brutal. So there were weeks when I didn't see my wife at all. And I thought, I can sit here and watch hundreds of basketball games and maybe that's great. But you kind of, you take an introspective look and you say, what could you do in the next year or two that's meaningful to you? And this book thing just kept coming back to me. And it's like, well, I haven't looked at this in a while. Or like, how am I really going to do this? Um, and you just kind of figure it out. And then all of a sudden, my wife is, I'm like, I'm going to publish this book. And she's like, you're what? um, and, again, it's a weird thing when you kind of start to think about you're going to have public people that you never met, reading these stories about yourself. Do you really want that? Do you want to put all that out there? Um, but then the reception you get, and you take a look back at just why you do what you do and why you did it, which was, man, there's that seventh, eighth grade, ninth grade boy or girl that would love to hear some of this stuff. There's coaches out there that would appreciate it. There's other people that might be inspired or learn something from this. And so ultimately, you get it to the finish line, and the rest is just kind of history. And I'm obviously super grateful for everything that's transpired since I put it out.
I love it because as you're speaking on that, it's what connected us. I can't remember how I had learned of you, and then someone talked about the books, and then I reached out to you, and you so generously sent those my way, and I'm sitting there reading these books, and I'm like, I I really like this guy. I mean, he works hard and he made sacrifices, and and he has family, and he did whatever he could to stay around the game, and he gets a job with Kellogg, and then he's in Park City, and so there's just so much of your journey that I could relate to, that I'm just like, there's a why to this. And he's educating and he's empowering others. And I'm like, I've got to get him on the show just so people can be aware of how great these books are.
No, I appreciate that. And that's the funny thing is, you put the book out, you talk to people and people send you things. And I think one of the craziest stories, and this still gives me kind of goosebumps, but I work in sales, to your point. I work, in e-commerce sales. And a few years ago, I was talking to somebody on a sales call, and he was the CEO of a grain company in Boston, and they made cereal and granola bars and all these things. And somehow we were talking about the Celtics, and he's like, "Yeah, I've got a 13-year-old son, and he loves basketball, and we're coaching his team, and you know, it's great." And we just started reading this book, and he's like, it's called Walk On Warrior. It's just an amazing book. Have you heard of it? And I just kind of stopped, and I thought to myself, like, wow, like God is good. Like to have something like that happen, and then when you just kind of pause and say, I wrote that book, you know, he's just
Right.
like, holy crap, really? Um, and so, there's things like that that just, make it all worth it. And I think, again, writing a book is hard. And there's so many, long nights where you're up until the wee hours of the morning and you're fixing stuff. Um, but when you're really passionate about it and you're passionate about the stories, and to your point, there's a deeper why there. It definitely makes it all worth it.
Yeah, love that. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is the Coach Scott Field Show, and we've got John Willkom on talking about his books and his experiences. And, that first book, led you to a subject, we talked about a little bit before, but no fear in the arena. And you showcase Travis and kind of document his journey and his career. And what better subject other than someone who you got to work with on a daily basis and helped him prepare in the program? So talk to us about that relationship, what that relationship obviously still means to you. Of course, I knew who he was because I'm a professional basketball coach, and I'm always watching players that possibly I could bring overseas with me, or to help our teams, because great players make great coaches out of us in a hurry. And then seeing the TBT tournaments and seeing the Golden Eagles, and a buddy of mine, Trend, who's out here with the Salt Lake Stars right now as an assistant coach. Getting to know Wesley Matthews, and sitting around with him, with Hall of Fame coach Jerry Sloan, and I meet Trend. And again, just that a few degrees of separation from all of us, and we're all connected. But Travis has a great story. He's had a great career, and that's your subject matter for No Fear in the Arena. Talk about that relationship and the things that you've learned from him. I know you talked about a little bit, but just wow, what a great subject to write on, because again, here's a guy who can inspire you, because he's someone that a lot of people can relate to, because he's not big, he's not super athletic, and a lot of people out in the driveway are just like that. So I think that's why we can relate to a Travis or a Steph Curry, who's transforming the game, who I got to be around with the Golden State Warriors, his rookie year. So talk about that relationship, and how it triggered you to be like, that's my second book.
Yeah. So, obviously Travis and I played together. And even before that, um, Travis was a senior in high school, and he grew up about 2 hours from me. And every year in the fall, there's this thing in Wisconsin called the Wisconsin Basketball Yearbook. And you get this guide sent to your house, and it was like, Christmas Day. You'd run down to the mailbox, this 500-page book, and it had every high school team, the players, the stats, the top ranked players in each class, conference rankings. It was the ultimate kind of, junkie guide. And so his senior year, Travis was on the cover, and he was the preseason state player of the year. And I was on the list of like top 30 sophomores in the state. And so I'm like, wow, look at me, there I am. Um, and so long story short, I had never seen Travis play, but to your point, I'm like, we're kind of look the same, we're 6 foot white guys and shoot a little bit and we can handle the ball. Not super gifted athletes. And so there was a game. Travis's team was the number one school in the state, and they were playing the number two. And my dad says, we're driving over to watch that game. And so we drive over there. We get there probably hour and a half early, and the gym is just packed. Like it's impossible to find a seat. We finally just kind of nuzzle in. And I happened to be sitting next to this guy in a leather coat, skin's really tan. And I'm like, that's Tom Crean. This is the coach of Marquette. And of course, my dad's a Marquette fan. And so we have a good conversation, and, foreshadowing as I would, obviously be with Coach Crean a few years later. But we watched Travis just go off. And I think he had 40 points in the game. The game is close, just a tremendous high school basketball environment, game, raucous fans. And it was one of those things where, we drive 2 hours home and we just couldn't stop talking about shots he hit, the tough moves that he made, the clutch parts of that game. We're like, he's the real deal. And that was very inspiring for me. Again, as a high school, I was starting on the varsity as a sophomore, was having a good season, but it was another thing that you just kind of plug into your brain to say, there's a whole nother level to this, and that's what it looks like. Um, and so that was a kind of a pivotal moment for me just as an athlete. And now looking back, it was a pivotal moment with my father because there's not many times the older you get that you can just take a 4-hour round trip, car ride with your dad and just talk basketball. It was amazing.
Oh, great,
Um,
great bonding experience to share a passion that you both connect with and can get to on a deeper level. And I love hearing that because, again, that's what it's all about. And, with these younger players, if they can tap into that and find their purpose and find their passion and then just, allow them the opportunity to grow and develop, personally and professionally, on the court, it's just great stories.
Absolutely. And I think that's just a lot of people will look at this book and they'll say, well, isn't it kind of similar to the first book that you wrote? And what's interesting is originally we were going to write this where I kind of ghost wrote it as Travis. And that's how it started. And I was a ways in. I was probably 40 or 50 pages in. And he just said, I don't think you're going to get enough stuff from me. I'm not a great storyteller. I don't remember the stuff maybe as much detail as I can tell you to make it interesting. So we kind of made a major pivot. And he said, what if I introduce you to all these people that I played with, played for, even other professional basketball players, both in the NBA and overseas? I said, yeah, it's great. And so I'm not a trained maybe reporter, journalist, I'm a kind of doing this as a side passion, fun project. But here I am spending, the next 6 months on these interviews, and I'm talking to just amazing people from all over the world. And again, talk about just changing your perspective. The stories they told, the way that they told them, how passionate they were about certain things. And I'm like, this is just absolute gold, you know? And that I think is what is so cool about this book is that it's not I mean, it was me putting it all together, but this guy has had one of the, it's hard to even describe what a crazy career he's had, long into his late 30s. And when I tell people some of it, they almost don't believe it. They're like, that can't be right. And one of the biggest things is that Travis played in the NBA for 5 seasons. He's got I believe a lifelong pension. He's set. And he had a contract offer to come home and play for the Milwaukee Bucks as a third string point guard in his late 20s and make it several $1,000,000 and he'd be set for life. And he said, I don't want to do that. I actually want to go play in Italy and I want to play meaningful minutes and I want to lead a team and I want to compete for a championship and I don't care what they pay me. And it's like, who in today's day and age would do that? Nobody does that. And so the fact that he left the NBA on his own accord to go play for a startup ball club that was just going into Serie A in the Italian league, and ultimately reunites with his cousin and they form this just dynamic European backcourt. It's an incredible story.
It really is. And again, I was blessed that I coached for 15 seasons overseas as a head coach in some amazing countries and got to experience culture and different religions and of course different languages and learning different currency. And it's truly enriching. But yeah, and even my adopted son now is playing over in the country of Finland. And so I can't wait for him to have the opportunity to read this book and to be able to take some of the selflessness, take away some of the ego. And here's just a guy who loves to play. And as you and I shared a minute ago, it comes back in the TBT tournament, where it's a $1 million winner take all. and yet this alumni team comes together and does an amazing job competing in that TBT tournament. Kind of speak on that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, Travis had played in the TBT for a few seasons, and Marquette's alumni team, the Golden Eagles, had actually gotten to the championship game, and they lost to Carmen's Crew, which is the group from Ohio State, and they kind of decided to give it one more shot. And to your point, they make it to the championship game, and this is during kind of the height of COVID, so they're in this bubble. They can't talk to any of the other teams. Travis is 38 years old. He's got kind of a calf injury, so he's like, he's sitting in the hotel for a week at a time, so he wants to play in the game, but he probably shouldn't. And long story short is yeah, they need 3 points to basically win $1 million. And Mr. 38-year-old has not scored a point the entire game. And they put him in, and ball moves, and all of a sudden this guy drives, and he's got a layup. And he can take the two, still would need a point to win it. But instead of laying the ball in, he kicks it to the corner. And just like he has probably 1 million times, he just doesn't think twice. He hits that shot. And like you said, I mean, one shot for $1 million is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I love it because I can still see that play forming as they kick it out. And like you said, just in rhythm, catch and shoot, like again, muscle memory, all those hours of practice, and you bang it against him there at Marquette,
Yeah.
when he was, in his early stages of his career. It's so fun to see success stories like that because it's real and it's real people, and you get to kind of live vicariously through them and see them do amazing things. And how about some of the stories as you were interviewing people overseas? Talk about some of the stories that were shared with you where you're just like, I've got to get this in the book, where it just moved you to hear their passion through their stories.
Yeah, there's a couple that stand out and they're very different. So the first one is one of the best things about Travis's experiences there was the coach he played for. Mayo Sacchetti, who played actually on the Olympic team, for the Italians back in, I believe it was 1980, 1984. His son actually played on the team with Travis. And so they're going through this training camp. And as teams in a lot of parts of Europe and especially in Italy, there's a lot of practice and you're playing a lot less games. So there's 30 games. But the training camp is like 6 weeks long, in August and September.
That's right.
And they're doing conditioning out on the beach. And, instead of, standing there or having a whistle, Mayo comes walking past the team with a towel on his shoulder and swim trunks and a cigar in his mouth and a big inner tube. And he just goes out into the ocean, and, multiple guys were like, I've never seen anything like that. I mean, this guy's just enjoying the beach and we're running, sand sprints, and it's so odd. But so many people just talked about their love for him as a man, and how he kind of led that team, and the fact that he was able to have, both one-on-one and team conversations with these guys, invite them over, for dinners at his home. It was just so many people talk about, like you said, that culture and that family atmosphere, but then to actually tell these stories and for readers to say that's what it looks like, that's what it feels like. He did it. And so I think that's definitely one. And then complete opposite side, Travis and crew were playing in the Euro Cup in Belgrade, Serbia. And there
Again,
was
another great atmosphere. Yes.
great atmosphere. So much so that there Travis's team hits a shot, they tie the game at halftime, and all of a sudden, and you've probably been through this, but things are raining down from the stands, and they're trying to get the players off the floor. And again, there's plenty of bags of popcorn, but there's also car keys and rolls of tape. And so everyone's like, get to the tunnel and screaming. And one of the players said, I remember being under that tunnel And I turn around and I look, and here's Travis Diener standing at half court, just screaming at the fans. Like he just hit the shot. He is so into the game. It's like, get out of there, get back to the tunnel, but just in the moment. And the quote that he used is he's like, I stood there and I thought to myself, like, I just want to have that dog in me too. And I thought, you know, that's that's just something you can't teach. That's
Yeah.
just
What a great way of encapsulating. I remember taking my wife over to Italy, and we were at Bologna, and there was a gentleman there who played that also played with the Toronto Raptors, who I became very good friends with, and so we go in and we're at the arena, and as you talked about, the fans are chanting and the banners are going, and there's just this great atmosphere and intensity, and they're going to the free throw line and on the home court, and they're on the basketball standard and the basket's moving, and my wife looks at me and goes, can they do that? I said, welcome to Europe, babe.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely,
things that you don't experience here. There's just a whole nother level of intensity and passion, because it's like those communities will shut down for their soccer. Soccer's number one in Europe without a doubt, but basketball was on the rise. And even through some of these COVID years where they didn't have as much financial backing and support, but yet those fans are just so fanatical about it. And I just love that he could and be in that moment, embrace it, and just soak it in, because those competitions mean everything for those guys, other than when they're representing their countries for their national team.
absolutely. And one of the craziest things was that, Travis played for the same club for 4 seasons, which is somewhat rare because most of
Right.
these contracts are 1-year deals and
That's right.
nothing's guaranteed and people come and go. But his family loved it there. His wife was actually an Italian citizen. And so some of the transition was maybe a little easier because she actually spoke Italian.
Right.
But um, when he left there, they actually retired his jersey. And to
That's
have that
awesome.
happen to someone like that, when we were looking at pictures and stuff for the inside of the book, it almost looked like some of these were Photoshopped because there was, pictures of him on large buildings, or on buses. And it's like, wow. And to your point, he was playing for Dynamo, Sassari on the island of Sardinia.
Ooh.
And so Sardinia is an island and there's one professional basketball team. And if you treat people well and you perform, these people, will support you to the death. And
Yeah.
so he really, he earned obviously the admiration of the people there. He was very gracious back to them. He was very much like a part of the community. He was out and about, which I give him a lot of credit for. And I think that, you know, not to preach too much about European or overseas success, but I just think the guys that can go over there and not look at it as being away from home, that can look at it as this is my home
Yeah.
and I'm gonna be a part of what's going on here and really embrace it.
That's right. You embrace the culture. You pick up the language. You're doing camps and clinics with the community and the youth, and you're giving back. And I'll tell you, they treat you as gods, and it's net income, and your amenities are taken care of. It's a great life, and it's a quality life, and I'm so glad that he was able to experience that. Was there any story of Travis's that you wanted to get in the book that you couldn't fit in, that was edited out, that you're like, man, if I had more space, I mean, could we have put that in?
There's certain things that that we took out maybe just because it was a little bit too much detail. And I think that's that line of,
Yeah.
being respectful as a partner. Again, we did this together.
Right.
Ultimately, I want him to be super proud of whatever we're putting out there. And we had good, healthy debates about some of that, which was actually fun because it was like, do we really want to tell all of this? Or should some of this, stay in that locker room from 15, 20 years ago?
The
And I
legend.
think
Let
that
it be legend.
you let it be the legend. And
Yeah.
that was a good, fun exercise because ultimately, I'm trying to make it appealing and yet, as truthful as possible to the
That's right.
audience. And at the same time, it's his name, it's his reputation, it's his experience, it's how maybe he saw things. And so, we certainly didn't want to, jeopardize that or put it, in peril in any way. But I think one of the fun things about talking to other people too is they told stories from their point of view. And it's amazing sometimes when he first read the book, I sent him the book at like 9 o'clock at night during the week. And I woke up and I had like a text from him saying like, I read the whole thing. I
Wow.
I
Yeah.
loved it. I loved it. And I'm like, you read that whole thing like all night long? And he's like, yeah. And so, that was a little bit of an affirmation for me of just like, we did a good job. We
That's right.
told the stuff that was meaningful. We tried to make it, passionate and again relatable to people. But that's always a good thing. When you sit here for days and hours on end trying to make it right, to get that type of feedback was pretty fun.
I love that because you know what? He was able to probably live it through the fans, the coaches, the players, through their truths. And then it probably triggered his memories to be like, I do remember that game or I do remember that moment. And wow, the impact that it can make. So, kudos to both of you for putting that out there. We've got a couple minutes left. John, where can the viewers of the show find your books? Where can they order them? How can they get copies?
Yeah, so both books are on Amazon. Again, the first one, you're showing No Fear in the Arena, was the one that I just published in December. And then Walk On Warrior was the first book I wrote that was published in 2018. And so both are available on Amazon. Again, love to hear feedback from people and comments. And, plenty of people want to ask questions or debate certain topics. And that's another fun part about writing a book is, you know, this is the way I saw it, and maybe you don't agree, and that's okay. Um, but I love engaging in that type of stuff. So feel free to hit me up on Twitter or send me a message.
There you go. And I love that. And John, I can't thank you enough for sharing the books with me, allowing me the opportunity because I was the same way. I start reading them in the afternoons and the next thing I know, I'm gosh, several chapters into it and I'm locked in because I'm just like I'm connecting to the stories because I too have lived that life. So to see someone else's story and journey, it's inspired me to want to get my book and my story out there for my grandkids, as just as you said. And I think you've done just an amazing job, and I'm thrilled for you. And I know that's not what you set out to do, but here you are as an award winner, bestseller, and by gosh, I'm thrilled to have gotten to know you through this conversation, and I love the way you share the stories and share the journey because again, it's something that they can connect to, and I do hope everybody goes out and gets a copy of both of these for their library because if you're a basketball fan or you just need life lessons, please go out and get the Walk On Warrior or No Fear in the Arena and and feel what's going on because you've done a great job of putting those into words, my friend.
No, I really appreciate it, Scott. It was an honor to be on the show. Thanks so much for all the great questions. And yeah, this was really a lot of fun for me.
Well, I hope I did it justice because to me, there's so much that I was so excited about within the books that I'm like, I want to make sure that we can, talk about that because I really do want the, viewers to get out there and get a copy because they really are good reads. And I'm not just saying that because you're on the show. I mean, I reached out to you, you got copies to me over the holidays. I was able to read it. I'm like, this is great stuff.
No, I really appreciate that. I think, that was the fun thing too, is just to write a book yourself is one thing, and it's your thoughts and ideas and philosophies, for lack of a better term. But then to kind of flip it and to talk to all these people. And again, I talked to teammates and coaches. I talked to, Jeff Foster, who played with Travis and the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right.
I had asked Travis, I'm like, who's the best college player you ever played against? And he said, Steve Logan, who was a point guard for Cincinnati,
Yeah.
All American. He actually got drafted by Golden State, end of the first round. And so I talked to Steve Logan. And those were some of the things too that Travis is reading the book and is like, how did you get a hold of Steve Logan and Jeff Foster and all these other guys? And it's like, well, I got to throw a few, a few tricks in there for you. Um, but that made it really fun for me too, because ultimately, those are the types of things where I'm looking at this roster of interviews, and you're trying to fill in the gaps. You're trying to tell meaningful full stories. But I'm really grateful for all those guys that, had a lot of fun just chatting with me. The last thing I'll share on that is that I I was hoping to talk to one individual in particular, and I didn't know if we'd be able to make it happen. And I'm sitting here, doing kind of my day job, and I get a text message, and it said, "John, this is the best basketball player Travis Diener has ever played with." Thought, is this Dwayne Wade? And he said, "Yeah."
Great stuff.
And he's like, I'm like, "Are you available to chat right now?" He says, "Yes." And so I call this number, he picks up, we have this, hour long kind of unfiltered interview. And that was really cool for me too, because I had obviously been around Wade at Marquette. I had scrimmaged with him in the summertime, but we didn't play together.
Right.
Um, and for him to take the time to do that and just to kind of talk off the record and put out kind of just unfiltered, raw thoughts about time at Marquette and who Travis was and how he kind of led that Final Four team, was pretty special for me.
Love it. Ladies and gentlemen, again, you're watching the Coach Scott Field Show, and that's John Willkom. And again, the books, Walk On Warrior and No Fear in the Arena, go out and get them for your library. I promise you, you're going to be thanking me. But thanks again for watching another edition of the Coach Scott Field Show. John, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and give those kids a hug, and hopefully you can get some rest too, because I know it's getting late out there your time right now. God bless you, friend.
God bless you, Scott. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
You bet. Thank you.